welcome to a journey back in time, where the grandest castles held the most peculiar dangers, and even a king's throne could be his undoing. We'll explore a forgotten history, filled with the strange, the cruel, and the utterly unexpected ways medieval life could turn deadly, especially when it came to something as mundane as a toilet. If this tale helps you unwind and drift into a peaceful slumber, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories like this. Let's get started. In a time long past, when flickering torchlight danced upon stone walls and the scent of wood smoke mingled with damp earth, life, even for the most powerful, was a precarious affair. Kings, with their jeweled crowns and velvet cloaks, seemed invincible, their every whim a command. Yet beneath the veneer of absolute power, vulnerabilities lurked in the most unexpected corners, sometimes even in the very chambers designed for their most private moments. Imagine, if you will, the bustling court of King the Pompous, a man whose ego was as vast as his sprawling kingdom, Lyra. He was a monarch who believed himself touched by the divine, a ruler whose decrees were law and whose word was absolute, no matter how whimsical or cruel they might be. His castle, the Formidable, was a marvel of medieval engineering, its towers piercing the clouds, its walls thick enough to withstand the fiercest siege. But within these very walls, in a small, unassuming chamber jutting out from the main structure, lay a hidden peril. This chamber, known euphemistically as the guardrobe, was private latrine. Unlike the common folk who might use a ditch or a communal privy, enjoyed the luxury of a personal facility. It was a simple affair, really. A wooden seat over a shaft that dropped several stories down into the castle's moat, or sometimes a cesspit. For centuries, these guardrobes had served their purpose, a crude but essential part of castle life. No one, not even the most learned scholars, truly understood the unseen dangers that brood within their depths. The air within these shafts was thick, stagnant, and laden with what the commoners simply called bad humors. They attributed illnesses to these mysterious vapors, but the true, scientific understanding of disease was centuries away. King, despite his perceived grandeur, suffered from a persistent ailment that often left him pale and weak. The royal physicians, with their leeches and strange poultices, were baffled. They prescribed various concoctions, none of which seemed to bring lasting relief. However, dismissed his illness as a mere inconvenience, a minor flaw in an otherwise perfect existence. He spent countless hours on his guardrobe, often dictating letters or planning grand feasts from this very seat, oblivious to the silent, invisible enemy that lurked below. The air in his guardrobe, confined and undisturbed, was a breeding ground for noxious gases, methane, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide, byproducts of human waste decomposition. In high concentrations, these gases were not just unpleasant, they were deadly. One particularly sweltering summer, the air in Lyra grew heavy and still. A suffocating humidity hung over the kingdom, and within the castle walls, the usual drafts seemed to vanish. The stench from the moat, usually kept at a tolerable distance, intensified, wafting upwards into the castle's lower levels, and most dangerously into the guardrobe shafts. King, feeling unwell after a particularly rich banquet, retreated to his private chamber. He dismissed his guard, seeking a moment of solitude and relief. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, eerie shadows across the castle grounds. Inside the guardrobe, the air was unusually thick, almost palpable. Felt a sudden dizziness, a tightening in his chest. He dismissed it, attributing it to the feast, perhaps a touch of indigestion. He leaned back, his eyes closing, a sigh escaping his lips. And then silence. Hours later, the royal guards grew concerned. It was unusual for the king to remain in his private chamber for so long, especially without summoning his attendants. A nervous knock on the door yielded no response. A second, more urgent knock, and then a worried whisper among the guards. Finally, a decision was made. Sir Gideon, captain of the royal guard, a man as stoic as the castle walls themselves, ordered the door to be forced open. The chamber was empty. A chill, more profound than the night air, swept through the guards. Their eyes fell upon the guardrobe, its simple wooden door slightly ajar. A sense of dread, cold and creeping, began to settle in their hearts. They cautiously approached the small chamber. The air within was heavy, putrid, and strangely still. Gideon, brave and loyal, pushed the door open further. There, slumped over the wooden seat, was King. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was gone. A gasp of horror, quickly stifled, rippled through the guards. The mighty king, ruler of Lyra, had met his end not on a battlefield, not by an assassin's blade, but in the most ignoble and private of ways. The royal physicians were summoned, their faces contorted with confusion and fear. They examined the king but found no visible wounds, no signs of poison. The cause of death remained a mystery to them, a perplexing puzzle. Superstition, ever present in the medieval mind, began to weave its own narrative. Some whispered of a curse, others of divine retribution for numerous acts of cruelty. You see, King was not a benevolent ruler. His reign was marked by an iron fist and a heart of stone. One of his most infamous laws was the law of silent suffering. If a peasant dared to complain about their meager rations or crushing taxes, they would be subjected to a public whipping, administered in complete silence. No cries, no groans were permitted. If a single sound escaped their lips, the punishment would be doubled. This law, designed to break the spirit of dissent, instilled a deep, simmering resentment among the common folk. Another example of his tyranny was the tribute of tears. Every year, the villages under his dominion were required to send a certain amount of gold, but also a symbolic jug of tears from their mothers, weeping for their children forced into military service or labor. It was a grotesque display of power, a reminder of his absolute dominion over their lives and their very emotions. The royal court, however, dared not speak ill of the deceased king. Fear of retribution, even from beyond the grave, was a powerful deterrent, but whispers, like tendrils of smoke, began to circulate among the servants, the stable boys, and the laundresses. They spoke of the foul stench that sometimes emanated from the king's private chamber, a smell far worse than any ordinary privy. They spoke of strange headaches and dizzy spells experienced by those who had to clean the guardrobes. These were dismissed as mere peasant superstitions, unrefined notions from uneducated minds. But perhaps within those unrefined notions lay a kernel of truth that the learned physicians, with all their elaborate theories, could not grasp. The death of King sent shockwaves throughout Lyra. His son, Prince Lysander, a timid and scholarly young man, was thrust onto the throne. Lysander, unlike his father, was gentle and kind-hearted, more interested in ancient scrolls than jousting tournaments. He was ill-prepared for the cutthroat world of medieval politics, and even less so for the peculiar challenges of castle hygiene. The court, a den of vipers disguised in silk and velvet, saw Lysander's weakness as an opportunity. The powerful nobles, who had chafed under his cruel hand, now sought to manipulate the new king for their own gain. One such noble was Baron, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his family crest, a snarling dragon. With his cunning mind and ruthless demeanor, quickly became Lysander's most trusted advisor, slowly but surely consolidating his power. He began to introduce new laws, seemingly innocuous at first, but each designed to subtly erode Lysander's authority and enrich himself. One such law decreed that all common lands, traditionally used by peasants for grazing and foraging, would now be subject to a steep tax, payable directly to the baron. Those who could not pay would forfeit their lands, forcing them into servitude or destitution. This was a clear abuse of power, a continuation of the old king's tyranny, albeit cloaked in a velvet glove. Meanwhile, the mystery of King's death continued to plague Lysander. He couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that his father's demise was not simply an act of God. He began to pore over ancient texts, seeking answers, his scholarly nature finally finding a purpose in the grim reality of his new position. He discovered vague references to miasmas and pestilential humors that could rise from stagnant places and cause sudden death. These descriptions, though lacking scientific precision, resonated with the faint, unsettling memories of the stench from his father's guardrobe. Lysander, despite his gentle nature, possessed a keen intellect. He began to observe the castle's sanitation practices, or lack thereof. He noticed the same pungent odor lingering around other guardrobes in the castle, particularly those used by the servants and guards, which were even less well-maintained than the royal one. He noticed that many of the castle's inhabitants, particularly those who spent a lot of time near these facilities, often suffered from chronic coughs, fevers, and a general malaise. He also remembered the unusual punishment his father had once devised for a particularly disrespectful stable boy. The boy, caught pilfering a small amount of grain, was sentenced to spend a night chained inside the cesspit chamber, a dark, foul-smelling dungeon beneath the guardrobe shafts. The next morning the boy was found dead, his face contorted in a silent scream. The official explanation was illness, but Lysander now wondered if it was something far more insidious, something linked to the very air he had been forced to breathe. The pieces of a grim puzzle slowly began to fall into place in Lysander's mind. The air, the stench, the sudden deaths, the chronic illnesses, they all pointed to a silent killer, an invisible enemy lurking within the castle's very infrastructure. He called for the master builder of an old man named, whose family had been constructing and maintaining the castle for generations. With his gnarled hands and eyes that had seen centuries of stone and mortar, knew the castle's secrets better than anyone. Lysander, with a hesitant voice, asked about the guardrobes, the shafts, and the bad air that seemed to rise from them. At first was dismissive. "It is simply the way of things, your majesty," he said, his voice raspy with age. The waste must go somewhere, and with it, the odors. It is a natural part of life. But Lysander pressed on, describing his father's sudden death, the stable boy's demise, and the persistent ailments among the castle staff. Listened, his ancient eyes beginning to show a flicker of concern. "There are tales, your majesty," finally admitted, his voice barely a whisper, "of other lords and ladies who have met similar fates, not just here but in other castles across the land. They say it is the vapors of the pit, a curse that rises from the depths to claim the unwary." Whilst explanation was rooted in superstition, Lysander sensed a kernel of truth within it. He ordered to conduct a thorough inspection of all the castle's guard-robes, especially those with the deepest shafts. He also decreed that for the safety of all, large ventilation shafts should be built, and fires should be burned at the base of the guard-robe shafts to create a constant upward draft, hopefully carrying the noxious fumes away. This was a radical idea, met with skepticism and even derision by many of the nobles, particularly Baron, who saw it as a frivolous expense. Ever the opportunist, sought to undermine Lysander's efforts, subtly suggesting that the new king was being overly superstitious, wasting royal funds on peasant fears. "Your Majesty," would purr, his voice dripping with feigned concern, "surely your time would be better spent addressing the pressing matters of state, rather than concerning yourself with the humble conveniences of the latrine. These are but old wives' tales, fit for commoners, not for a king." Lysander, however, remained resolute. He had seen the evidence, felt the unsettling truth in his gut. He knew that this was not merely a matter of comfort, but of life and death. He commanded his royal engineers to begin the work, instructing them to devise systems that would improve ventilation and reduce the buildup of stagnant air and dangerous gases. This was a slow, arduous process. Medieval engineering, while impressive for its time, lacked the tools and understanding necessary for truly effective sanitation. But Lysander persisted, driven by a quiet determination. He even established a new royal ordinance, somewhat unusual for the time, requiring all new castle construction to include larger, better ventilated guard-robes, and for existing ones to be regularly cleaned and aired out. He also made it a punishable offense to dispose of certain organic materials down the shafts, realizing that some waste decomposed more quickly and produced more dangerous fumes. This was a small step, but a significant one in the long history of public health. As Lysander delved deeper into the mysteries of medieval sanitation, he began to understand the true extent of the problem. Not only were the guard-robes a source of deadly gases, but they were also a haven for disease-carrying vermin. Rats with their flea-infested fur through the shafts, spreading plague and other deadly illnesses throughout the castle. Flies, attracted to the filth, buzzed through the royal kitchens, contaminating food and drink. The castle, for all its imposing grandeur, was a breeding ground for invisible killers. Lysander felt a growing sense of urgency. He realized that the well-being of his kingdom, not just his court, depended on understanding and mitigating these unseen threats. He began to commission studies, rudimentary though they were, into the causes of disease, questioning the prevailing theories of bad humors and divine wrath. His efforts were met with mixed reactions. The common folk, who had always lived with the omnipresent threats of illness and famine, viewed his initiatives with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Some saw him as a wise and compassionate ruler, truly concerned for their welfare. Others, steeped in generations of superstition, believed he was meddling with forces best left untouched. The powerful nobles, however, saw Lysander's focus on sanitation as a distraction, a sign of his weakness and inability to grasp the real matters of statecraft. Baron, in particular, seized upon this as an opportunity to further his own agenda. He began to spread rumors that Lysander was obsessed with filth, that he was losing his mind, spending more time in the castle's latrines than in the council chambers. Even went so far as to suggest that Lysander's interest in such unseemly matters was a sign of a deeper, more troubling instability, an insult to the memory of his strong father. Ever the master manipulator, even tried to use one of the old king's cruel laws against Lysander. He accused a peasant of violating the law of silent suffering by groaning during a public lashing, a lashing himself had ordered for a minor infraction. He then demanded that Lysander enforce the law, knowing that Lysander's compassionate nature would rebel against such brutality. If Lysander refused, could accuse him of undermining his father's legacy and weakening royal authority. It was a clever trap. Lysander, however, had grown wiser. He saw through machinations. He acknowledged the law, but then decreed that from henceforth all public lashings would be carried out in a distant, secluded courtyard, far from the ears of the public. For, Lysander declared, the suffering of our people, even when justly earned, should not be a spectacle for entertainment or a source of fear. True justice does not revel in anguish, but seeks to restore order and instill discipline with a measure of dignity. This subtle defiance, while not abolishing the cruel law entirely, stripped it of its public humiliation and spectacle, effectively diminishing its power, and more importantly, undermining's attempt to use it against him. The tension between Lysander and escalated. Sensing his grip on the young king was slipping, grew bolder in his defiance. He openly questioned Lysander's decisions in court, other disgruntled nobles to his side, and even hinted at a potential coup. He believed Lysander, with his gentle disposition and unkingly fascinations, was ill-suited to rule, envisioned himself as the true power behind the throne, or perhaps even upon it. Lysander, however, had learned a great deal since his father's death. He had learned that true power was not just about brute force or tyrannical decrees, but about understanding the needs of his people, even the most basic and unglamorous ones, like their health and safety. He had also learned to be patient, to observe, and to listen. He continued his work on the castle's sanitation, expanding his efforts beyond the guard-robes. He ordered the construction of aqueducts to bring fresh water into the castle, improving hygiene in the kitchens and washing facilities. He mandated that all castle waste be collected and disposed of far from living quarters, rather than simply dumped into the moat or cesspits immediately surrounding the castle. These measures, though expensive and time-consuming, slowly began to bear fruit. The chronic illnesses among the castle staff began to decline. The stench, while not entirely eliminated, was significantly reduced. The castle, once a grand but dangerously unsanitary place, was slowly becoming a healthier environment. One cold winter's night, a particularly severe storm swept through Lyra. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the castle's windows and tearing at its banners. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the grounds into a muddy quagmire. The moat, already swollen, threatened to overflow its banks. Inside the castle, the air was heavy and damp. Baron, emboldened by a goblet too many of the finest wine, had been particularly vocal in his criticism of Lysander that evening. He had publicly ridiculed the king's obsession with peasant sewage, claiming it was a sign of his unworthiness to rule. Lysander, maintaining his usual calm demeanor, had simply listened, his eyes holding a quiet, knowing glint. Later that night, feeling the effects of the wine and the rich feast, found himself in need of a visit to his private garderobe. His chamber, unlike the king, had been neglected in Lysander's new sanitation efforts. In his arrogance, had refused to allow any peasant engineers to tamper with his private quarters, believing himself above such mundane concerns. He had even boasted that his garderobe, being higher up in the castle, was immune to the foul vapors that plagued the lower levels. As the storm raged outside, settled onto his wooden seat, the air within the shaft, confined and undisturbed for years, was particularly potent that night, trapped by the unusual atmospheric pressure of the storm. A sudden sharp pain seized his chest. His head reeled. He gasped, but the air he inhaled was thick, suffocating. He tried to cry out to call for his guards, but his voice failed him. A cold dread, far more potent than any fear of the king, gripped his heart. The storm outside seemed to mock his struggles, its thunder echoing like a drum roll for his final moments. And then, like king before him, Baron succumbed, alone and unseen, to the invisible killer lurking beneath him. The discovery of his body the next morning sent a different kind of shockwave through the court. This time there was less mystery, more a chilling sense of. The royal physicians, remembering King's similar demise, were quicker to suspect the vapors. Lysander, upon hearing the news, felt a pang of sorrow, but also a grim validation. He knew, with a certainty that transcended medieval superstition, what had truly happened. He ordered a thorough inspection of his garderobe, confirming his suspicions. The air quality within the shaft was dangerously high in toxic gases. He then publicly announced the cause of both deaths, not as a curse or divine retribution, but as a scientific truth, as much as medieval science could grasp it. He explained in simple, clear terms how stagnant waste produced harmful gases that could suffocate and kill. He emphasized the importance of proper ventilation and hygiene, not just for kings, but for everyone. This revelation, initially met with disbelief by some, slowly began to sink in. The court, once dismissive of Lysander's unkingly fascinations, now viewed him with a newfound respect, even awe. He had solved a mystery that had baffled generations, a mystery that had claimed two powerful men. He had not only secured his own position on the throne, but he had done so by prioritizing the well-being of his people, by embracing a form of knowledge that went beyond swords and political intrigue. From that day forward, King Lysander became known as Lysander the Wise, not for his military prowess or his vast conquests, but for his quiet intelligence, his compassion, and his unwavering commitment to improving the lives of his subjects, even in the most overlooked and unpleasant aspects of their existence. His reign was marked by a shift in focus. from grand wars and extravagant displays of power to more practical, everyday concerns that genuinely improve the quality of life for his people. He continued to advocate for better sanitation, not just within the castle, but throughout the kingdom. He commissioned the construction of public privies with improved ventilation in towns and villages, and promoted the idea of personal hygiene, a revolutionary concept for the time. He understood that a healthy populace was a strong populace, and that true power lay not in crushing dissent, but in fostering well-being. The moral of this tale, woven from the damp, ancient stones of a medieval castle, is a profound one. It teaches us that arrogance, no matter how grand, can be undone by the most humble of realities. It shows us that true wisdom often lies in looking beyond the obvious, in understanding the unseen forces that shape our lives, and in prioritizing the health and well-being of all, not just the powerful. It reminds us that even in the darkest corners, where foul odors linger and unseen dangers lurk, there is knowledge to be found, and that knowledge, when applied with compassion and intelligence, can truly change the course of history, one well-ventilated garderobe at a time. The grandest kings, with all their might and splendor, could fall victim to the very facilities designed for their comfort, a humbling reminder that nature's laws often supersede human authority. And so, the story of medieval toilets that killed kings became a silent lesson, whispered through the ages, about humility, vigilance, and the surprising power of something as simple as fresh air. And so, the quiet understanding that Lysander brought to his kingdom continued to spread slowly, like the dawn breaking over a misty landscape. It was a gradual shift, for medieval minds, so often steeped in ancient superstitions and ingrained customs, did not change overnight. Yet, the seeds of a new kind of thought had been sown, a practical wisdom that valued sanitation as much as strength of arms. Lysander understood that true governance extended beyond decrees and taxes. It reached into the very fabric of daily life, touching the health and well-being of every man, woman, and child in his realm. He was a king who walked through the crowded market squares, not just to collect tithes, but to observe the conditions, to speak with the common folk, and to listen to their concerns, however humble. He learned that many illnesses that plagued the villages, the dreaded sweating sickness, the painful flux, and the various fevers, were often linked to contaminated water sources, unmanaged waste, and the persistent presence of vermin. He initiated royal edicts that, while perhaps seeming mundane to some, were revolutionary in their impact. He commanded that village wells be regularly cleaned and covered to prevent refuse from falling in. He encouraged the digging of deeper, more secure cesspits away from homes and water sources, a marked improvement from the common practice of simply throwing waste into the nearest ditch. He also established a system of sanitation inspectors, a small but dedicated group of individuals tasked with ensuring these new standards were met. These inspectors, often drawn from the ranks of literate monks or skilled tradesmen, faced resistance, of course. Old habits died hard, and many peasants viewed their visits with suspicion, seeing them as yet another intrusion by the crown. But Lysander, patient and persistent, knew that education was key. He commissioned simple pamphlets, illustrated with crude but effective drawings, explaining the link between filth and sickness. These pamphlets, painstakingly by scribes, were distributed to churches and market squares, read aloud by priests and town criers. They spoke of the invisible demons that festered in stagnant water and rotting waste, invisible demons that modern eyes would recognize as bacteria and viruses. It was a rudimentary form of public health education, but it was a start, a flicker of light in an age of darkness. His queen, a woman of quiet strength and sharp wit, became his staunchest ally in these endeavors. She was a practical woman, raised in a smaller, less opulent court, and she understood the daily struggles of ordinary people. She often accompanied Lysander on his tour, lending her voice and gentle persuasion to his cause. She established schools for girls, not just to teach embroidery and manners, but also basic hygiene practices, understanding that the health of the family often rested in the hands of the women. She taught them about the importance of boiling water, of washing hands, a concept virtually unknown to most, and of keeping their homes clean and free of vermin. These were small steps, but they represented a profound shift in thinking, a recognition that the well-being of the kingdom was intertwined with the health of its individual citizens. Of course, not everyone welcomed these changes. There were still those, particularly among the older, more traditional nobles, who scoffed at Lysander's peasant concerns. They viewed his focus on sanitation as unbefitting a king, a distraction from what they considered to be the true business of ruling: warfare, diplomacy, and the accumulation of wealth. Lord, a man of ancient lineage and immense pride, was a particularly vocal critic. He believed that Lysander was weakening the kingdom, making it soft, by indulging in such feminine pursuits as cleanliness. A man whose castle was renowned for its lavish feasts and its equally lavish disregard for hygiene, often held court in his own magnificent but terribly unsanitary great hall, boasting of his family's robust constitutions that could withstand any peasant sickness. One day, a terrible plague swept through the neighboring kingdom of. It was a virulent strain, claiming lives indiscriminately, from the humblest stable boy to the most powerful duke. Fear, a cold and palpable presence, began to creep across the borders into Lyra. The common folk remembered the old king's cruel laws, the constant threat of unjust punishment, and they wondered if this new plague was a divine retribution for past sins, a trial sent by a vengeful god. They looked to Lysander, their king, with a mixture of hope and terror. Lysander, however, did not succumb to panic or superstition. He remembered the lessons learned from his father's tragic death, from the hidden dangers of the guardrobe. He immediately closed the borders too, a difficult but necessary decision that drew criticism from some who argued it would harm trade. But Lysander stood firm. He then intensified his sanitation efforts across the kingdom. He ordered communal bathhouses, often seen as places of vice, to be cleaned and open to the public, with strict rules about water purity and personal cleanliness. He mandated that all livestock be kept outside village limits, and that market areas be regularly cleaned and disinfected with strong lye and vinegar. Queen, with her innate understanding of everyday life, organized relief efforts, ensuring that those who fell ill were cared for, and that families were provided with clean water and basic provisions. She personally oversaw the distribution of boiled cloths for bandages and simple herbal remedies, offering comfort and care where the royal physicians, with their often ineffective treatments, could not. It was during this time that the wisdom of Lysander's policies truly began to shine. While succumbed to the ravages of the plague, its cities decimated, its population dwindling, Lyra, though not entirely untouched, suffered significantly less. The diligent efforts in sanitation, the cleaner water, the better disposal of waste, all contributed to a stronger, more resilient populace. The plague, while it claimed some lives, did not sweep through Lyra with the same devastating force it did in. Lord, ironically, was among the first in his own, notoriously unhygienic castle to fall ill. Despite his boasts of a robust constitution, his fortress, a veritable breeding ground for disease, offered no protection. He succumbed quickly, his arrogance unable to shield him from the invisible enemy he had so readily dismissed. His death served as a stark, undeniable testament to the wisdom of Lysander's approach, a grim reminder that even the mightiest walls and the proudest lineage offered no immunity to the unseen threats of an unsanitary world. The people of Lyra, witnessing the stark contrast between their kingdom's fate and that of, finally understood the true value of their king's seemingly strange preoccupations. They saw that Lysander's peasant concerns were, in fact, the most vital concerns of all. He had saved them, not with swords and battles, but with soap and water, with clean wells and proper waste disposal. He had shown them that true leadership lay in safeguarding the lives of his people, in preventing suffering, rather than merely reacting to it. King Lysander the Wise, as he was forever known, continued to rule Lyra for many prosperous years. His reign was not filled with tales of glorious conquests or magnificent treasures, but with stories of healthy villages, clean cities, and a populace that lived longer, healthier lives than their ancestors. He had taught his kingdom a profound lesson, that humility, attention to detail, and a genuine concern for the well-being of all, even in the most overlooked aspects of daily life, were the foundations of a truly strong and enduring realm. The humble guardrobe, once a silent killer of kings, became a symbol of a new era, an era where reason and care began to slowly, but surely, triumph over ignorance and neglect. His story became a quiet legend, whispered from generation to generation, a testament to the king who understood that sometimes the greatest dangers and the greatest solutions lay hidden in the most unexpected of places, even within the walls of a castle's private chamber, where a king once sat, oblivious to the peril beneath him. This long, continuous flow of words aims to gently carry you into a relaxed state, allowing your thoughts to drift and your mind to unwind as the story unfolds in its soft, unhurried pace. The legacy of King Lysander the Wise resonated through the ages, long after his gentle hand had left the throne. His teachings, initially met with skepticism and even scorn, slowly integrated into the fabric of daily life in Lyra. It wasn't merely about building better guardrobes or cleaning wells. It was about fostering a new way of thinking, a more critical and observant approach to the world around them. His emphasis on understanding the invisible demons that caused illness laid the groundwork for future generations to explore the rudiments of medicine and public health. Scribes in monasteries, inspired by Lysander's inquiries, began to meticulously record observations of disease patterns, correlating them with environmental factors, though still lacking the scientific vocabulary to fully articulate their findings. The very architecture of castles began to subtly change under his influence. New castles constructed in Lyra featured not only more robust defensive measures, but also incorporated improved ventilation systems, not just for the royal chambers but for the entire fortress. Designers began to consider the flow of air, the disposal of waste, and the access to clean water as integral parts of a building's design, rather than mere afterthoughts. This was a slow evolution, to be sure, but it was a foundational one. The guardrobe tax, once a symbol of royal convenience, was eventually repurposed by Lysander's successors to fund public sanitation projects, transforming a source of hidden danger into a tool for public good. Peasants who had once lived in squalor and resigned themselves to frequent bouts of illness began to see tangible improvements in their health. Children, especially, suffered less from the debilitating fevers and stomach ailments that had once claimed so many young lives. The impact on the kingdom's demographics was significant, though unnoticed by contemporary historians who focused more on battles and successions. A healthier populace meant more robust farmers, more skilled craftsmen, and ultimately, a more prosperous kingdom. The cycle of poverty and disease, though not entirely broken, was significantly weakened, allowing for greater stability and growth. Lysander's story became a cautionary tale for rulers across other lands. Emissaries from neighboring kingdoms, witnessing the relative health and prosperity of Lyra, began to inquire about the methods for preventing plague and disease. While many still clung to their ancient traditions and superstitions, some forward-thinking monarchs started to implement similar reforms, cautiously at first, but with increasing conviction as they saw the positive results. The concept of royal health, once a matter of personal physicians and exotic remedies, began to encompass broader public health initiatives, a testament to Lysander's quiet revolution. Even the concept of justice began to subtly shift in Lyra. Lysander's early experiences with his father's cruelty, particularly the law of silent suffering and the tribute of tears, had deeply affected him. While he did not immediately dismantle all vestiges of his father's harsh laws, he worked tirelessly to temper them with compassion and reason. He established a system of royal appeals, allowing peasants and commoners to directly petition the king for justice against corrupt lords or unfair practices. This was a radical departure from the norm, where a lord's word was often final, and it gave the common folk a voice they had never truly possessed. He abolished the tribute of tears entirely, declaring it a barbaric and inhumane practice that demeaned both the giver and the receiver. Instead, he instituted a tribute of labor, where communities would contribute a certain number of days to public works projects, building roads, maintaining bridges, or digging irrigation canals, projects that directly benefited the community rather than simply being a cruel display of power. He also introduced a concept of rehabilitative justice for minor offenses, favoring communal service or education over harsh physical punishments, especially for first-time offenders. He believed that a society that cared for its citizens, even those who stumbled, was ultimately a stronger one. The moral foundation of Lyra, under Lysander's leadership, became one of empathy and responsibility. He taught his people that while power was necessary for governance, it must always be wielded with a strong sense of duty and compassion. He demonstrated that true strength lay not in the ability to crush one's enemies or to impose one's will through fear, but in the capacity to uplift and protect one's people, to ensure their well-being, and to build a society where even the humblest individual could live with dignity and hope. This was a king who understood that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas weren't born on the battlefield, but in the quiet contemplation of a shared problem, a problem as seemingly insignificant as a poorly designed toilet, yet capable of bringing down the mightiest of rulers. His story serves as a gentle reminder that progress often comes not through dramatic leaps, but through persistent, thoughtful improvements to the everyday aspects of life, and that even the grandest of leaders can learn profound lessons from the most humble of circumstances. The tale of medieval toilets that killed kings wasn't just a story of danger. It was a testament to the enduring power of quiet wisdom. The wisdom that flowed from King Lysander's reign was not confined to the physical realm of sanitation and health. It also subtly reshaped the very essence of power within Lyra. For generations, kings had been seen as almost divine figures, their authority unquestionable, their whims absolute. The pompous had embodied this, believing his position granted him an innate superiority that transcended earthly concerns, even those as basic as the air he breathed. But Lysander, through his humble yet profound discoveries, inadvertently demystified kingship. He showed that even a king was subject to the same natural laws as a peasant, that invisible dangers did not discriminate based on birthright or crown. This understanding fostered a quiet shift in the perception of monarchy. While still revered, the king was now also seen as a steward, a protector, someone whose duty it was to understand the world and apply that knowledge for the good of all, rather than merely to command. This change wasn't dramatic, no sudden overthrow of tradition, but a gradual evolution of expectation. The common folk, once accepting of their lot as inevitable, began to expect a certain level of care and protection from their ruler. They saw Lysander's actions as a covenant, a promise of a better life, not just for the privileged few, but for everyone. This new social contract, unspoken yet deeply felt, strengthened the bond between the monarch and his subjects in a way that fear never could. It instilled a loyalty born not of terror, but of genuine gratitude and respect. Lysander's emphasis on rational inquiry and observable facts also had a subtle but far-reaching impact on the kingdom's intellectual landscape. While the age of true scientific revolution was still centuries away, his reign encouraged a greater appreciation for empirical observation over pure superstition. Scholars, inspired by his example, began to look at the world with more curious eyes, seeking explanations for phenomena that had once been dismissed as acts of gods or demons. This nascent spirit of inquiry, nurtured under Lysander's reign, became a quiet undercurrent in society, fostering a subtle intellectual awakening that would bear fruit in subsequent generations. Libraries, once repositories of ancient myths and religious texts, began to collect scrolls detailing practical knowledge, agricultural techniques, architectural innovations, and even early attempts at rudimentary medical treatises, all encouraged by the king who had learned a deadly lesson from a toilet. The cruel practices of the past, like the public display of suffering or the symbolic collection of tears, faded into memory, replaced by policies that, while still firm, were tempered with a sense of human dignity. The shadow of arbitrary cruelty that had once hung over the kingdom began to lift, replaced by a more predictable, and therefore more secure, system of governance. This shift, more than any military victory, Lyra's position as a stable and respected kingdom among its peers. Its borders, once secured by force, were now also guarded by a reputation for justice and enlightened rule. As Lysander grew older, his hair turning silver like the winter moon, he often reflected on the strange path that had led him to wisdom. He thought of his father, king, a man consumed by pride and blind to the simplest truths. He thought of Baron, whose ambition had been his undoing, and whose disdain for peasant concerns had proven fatal. He understood that the greatest lessons often came from the most unexpected teachers, and that humility was not a weakness, but the very foundation of true understanding. He knew that the silent killer in the guardrobe had not just claimed lives. It had also forged a new kind of king, one who understood that genuine power lay in caring for the breath that filled his subjects' lungs, the water that quenched their thirst, and the clean earth upon which they walked. His final decree, penned with a trembling hand but a clear mind, established a permanent royal commission for public health, tasking it with the ongoing responsibility of maintaining and improving sanitation throughout the kingdom, ensuring that the lessons learned from the deadly guardrobes would never be forgotten. It was a forward-thinking act, designed to ensure his legacy endured, not through monuments of stone, but through the enduring well-being of his people. And so, the story of medieval toilets that killed kings morphed from a cautionary tale into an inspiring legend, a testament to the transformative power of quiet leadership, compassionate governance, and the unexpected wisdom that can be found even in the most unsavory corners of history. It invites us to consider that sometimes the grandest stories are those that delve into the overlooked details of life, revealing profound truths about humanity, power, and the enduring quest for a better world. The gentle rhythm of this narrative, like a slow-flowing river, continues to guide you deeper into relaxation, leaving you with a sense of peace and a hint of ancient wisdom. The enduring ripples of King Lysander's reign extended far beyond his lifetime, shaping Lyra in ways that even he, in his quiet wisdom, might not have fully foreseen. His royal commission for public health, initially a novel concept, grew into a robust institution, its members dedicated to the continuous study and implementation of hygienic practices. They became the kingdom's earliest health officials, traveling from village to village, inspecting wells, advising on waste management, and even establishing rudimentary infirmaries where the sick could be cared for in cleaner, more supervised environments. This proactive approach to health gradually chipped away at the centuries-old fatalism that had plagued medieval society, replacing it with a burgeoning belief that human effort could indeed mitigate suffering and prolong life. The prosperity that followed Lysander's reign was undeniably linked to these reforms. With fewer devastating plagues and chronic illnesses, the population grew steadily. A healthier workforce was a more productive workforce. Farmers, no longer weakened by constant bouts of fever, could tend their fields more effectively, leading to more abundant harvests. Craftsmen, with clearer minds and stronger hands, produced goods of higher quality. Trade flourished, not only because Lyra's goods were well made, but also because its trading partners knew that coming to Lyra posed less risk of contracting debilitating diseases. This economic vitality, quietly built upon the foundations of good hygiene, became a source of envy for less enlightened kingdoms. Education also saw an unprecedented, albeit slow, growth. The emphasis Lysander placed on observation and understanding the natural world filtered down through society. More children, particularly boys and some girls from ambitious merchant families, were sent to monastic schools not just for religious instruction, but also to learn reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, skills increasingly valued in a kingdom that prized practical knowledge. Simple textbooks, often crude and hand-illustrated, began to appear, explaining concepts like crop rotation, basic mechanics, and even the benefits of fresh air and clean water. The era of blind acceptance of superstition began its long, slow decline, replaced by a growing curiosity and a desire to understand the how and why of the world. The tales of the deadly guard-robes, once whispered in hushed tones, transformed into cautionary parables taught to young princes and princesses. They served as a potent reminder that power came with responsibility, and that neglecting the seemingly insignificant aspects of governance could have catastrophic consequences. Lysander's legacy was not just about avoiding death, but about embracing life. A life lived with greater comfort, better health, and a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things. The moral thread woven through his story continued to bind the kingdom, reminding future rulers that genuine strength lay in wisdom and compassion, not just in might. Even the architecture of castle, once a symbol of arbitrary power, began to tell a different story. The improved guard-robes, the new ventilation shafts, the cleaner courtyards, these were not just functional improvements but visible testaments to a king who cared. Visitors from other lands would marvel at Lyra's prosperity and its surprisingly healthy populace, often hearing the tale of King Lysander, the gentle scholar who had uncovered a deadly secret in a place no one thought to look. This story, passed down through the generations, became a part of Lyra's national identity, a point of pride that they were a kingdom ruled by sense and foresight, rather than by ancient folly. The world outside Lyra, however, remained largely unchanged. Many kingdoms continued to suffer from the same ancient scourges, their rulers clinging to traditional beliefs and practices. Yet, Lyra stood as a beacon, a living testament to what could be achieved when a king dared to look beyond the obvious, when he allowed a moment of personal tragedy to transform into a catalyst for widespread, lasting good. The very air in Lyra seemed cleaner, the water and the laughter of its people more genuine, freed from the constant, gnawing fear of invisible death. And so, as the centuries turned and the medieval era slowly gave way to new ages, the quiet, persistent lessons of Lysander the Wise continued to guide Lyra. The kingdom remained known for its stable governance, its healthy populace, and its pragmatic approach to life's challenges. The story of when medieval toilets killed kings became more than just history. It became a foundational myth, reminding every generation that true leadership demanded humility, curiosity, and an unyielding commitment to the well-being of every soul under its protection. It was a story that, in its subtle way, helped lay the groundwork for a future where science and compassion would slowly begin to illuminate the hidden corners of the world, just as Lysander's lantern had once illuminated the dark, dangerous shaft beneath his father's throne. This continuous narrative brings us gently to its close, leaving you with the quiet echoes of a bygone era and the timeless truth it revealed. The echoes of Lysander's reign stretched into the distant future, becoming a foundational narrative for the generations that followed. Lyra, the kingdom once shadowed by the arbitrary cruelty of the pompous and the hidden dangers of its own infrastructure, transformed into a realm renowned not for its martial prowess, but for its enlightened governance and the health of its people. The story of the deadly guardrobes was woven into tapestries, recounted by bards, and inscribed in the annals of the Royal Academy of Health, an institution Lysander's successors further developed. This academy wasn't just a place for physicians, but for scholars of all stripes to study environmental factors, public hygiene, and the nascent concepts of disease prevention. This enduring commitment to health and well-being fundamentally altered the mindset. Where once there was a fatalistic acceptance of illness and early death, there grew a cautious optimism, a belief that with careful observation and diligent effort, life could indeed be improved. The average in Lyra noticeably increased compared to neighboring lands, a silent but powerful testament to Lysander's legacy. Families were larger, children healthier, and communities more vibrant. The constant cycle of grieving and replacement that characterized many medieval societies was less pronounced in Lyra, allowing for the slow accumulation of intergenerational knowledge and skills. The kingdom's prosperity became deeply entwined with its public health. Trade routes that once skirted plague-ridden territories now actively sought Lyra's ports, knowing that goods from Lyra were less likely to carry disease, and that its cities offered safe and healthy havens for merchants. This economic advantage, built upon the bedrock of Lysander's reforms, allowed Lyra to invest in other areas of societal development: better roads, more efficient agriculture, and even early forms of public education that extended beyond the monastic walls. The concept of common good gained a deeper meaning in Lyra, becoming a guiding principle for policy making, subtly shifting the balance of power from pure individualistic ambition to collective well-being. The moral lesson of Lysander's journey became a cornerstone of education. Children were taught not just the history of their kings, but the story of how a humble man, thrust into power, chose wisdom and compassion over arrogance and ignorance. They learned that true strength lay not in a king's ability to wage war, but in his capacity to protect and nurture the lives of his people, even from dangers unseen. The tale served as a powerful reminder that vigilance against complacency was crucial, and that the greatest threats could often emerge from the most overlooked details of daily life. As the centuries marched on, Lyra continued to evolve. Its cities became models of urban planning, incorporating advanced sanitation systems that bore the distant echoes of Lysander's initial, crude ventilation shafts. Clean water was plentiful, waste was managed efficiently, and public spaces were maintained with a care that would have been unimaginable in the time of. The memory of the bad humors and vapors of the pit faded into folklore, replaced by a scientific understanding of disease that allowed scholars to contribute significantly to the broader world's burgeoning medical knowledge. The story of the medieval toilets that killed kings, therefore, transcended a mere historical anecdote. It became a timeless parable about leadership, foresight, and the profound impact of seemingly small decisions. It taught that genuine power was not about demanding subservience, but about fostering health and knowledge. It revealed that the invisible dangers of the world, whether in the form of noxious gases or unchecked ambition, could be overcome not by brute force, but by intelligent observation, compassionate action, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of all. This final reflection on Lysander's lasting impact aims to leave you with a sense of completion, a quiet understanding of how even the most humble beginnings can lead to the most profound and lasting transformations, allowing you to peacefully drift into slumber with a gentle, satisfying conclusion to our story.